Hey, if you could, I'd love it if you could grab a seat, like right here in front of us. Whenever I get a chance to share, I just love being as close to you all as I can. So I'm excited to share with you this message that God has laid on my heart this evening. So I guess this started for me, the journey to get to this talk tonight. It started for me a long time ago, but particularly when I became aware of something that's very important in your world and in your culture. It came on a winter blitz trip in Austria of 2014. I had just moved our family over to Germany for the second time to work with military kids with Youth for Christ. And this was my very first trip to take with the guys that I was going to be hanging out with for the next couple of years. And I was super excited just to be there and to celebrate this week with them. It was in between Christmas and New Year's, and we get down there, we're in Austria, and as we're getting to spend some time together, each night we get to a deeper level of sharing, you know. And I remember one particular night, we're all sitting in this huge youth hostel in Austria, and one by one, each of the guys goes around the circle and they begin to share about their personal struggle with depression. Now, what struck me about this was that even if there was guys that were there who weren't personally struggling with it, then every single one of them knew somebody else who was struggling with it. And not just depression, but thoughts of suicidation, thinking about killing themselves. And some people even knew people who had attempted to do that. Now, what struck me about this was when I kind of left youth ministry for a short time to go do seminary, that was in 2009, this was not part of the conversation that we were having with kids. And so there was something that had changed. There was something that had happened between 2009 and 2014. And this was now a major conversation point for young people. And it shocked me. It surprised me quite a bit. And guys, this is also something that I'm on a journey with as well. I'm struggling with this. And I'll just share with you, I made a big step this week, and I scheduled my very first counseling appointment for this Friday. And part of it came out of the preparation for this, that if I'm going to be talking with you about it, I need to be walking that walk with you, you know? So, but this is huge. This subject is very important, and it's very near and dear to my heart. And this is, I believe, it's not just my experience, it's just not your experience, but it's becoming a national experience. It's becoming an epidemic, and the evidence for that is mounting. Just recently, suicide became the second leading cause of death for young people between the ages of 15 and 19. It now surpasses that of homicide, and only accidental injuries lead the leading causes of death right now. And the other thing, too, is this. Look at all the school shootings that are taking place across our country. So far, 2018 has been a really rough start to the year, okay? We're not even 12 weeks into this new year, and yet there's already been 17 school shootings. That's more than an average of 1.5 per week, according to a CNN report recently. That's huge. That's huge, that there would be that many school shootings. And I believe that there is a connection between what's happening in our schools and the mental health issues that are taking place in your world and in your culture. And I don't think they're unrelated to each other. They're very much related. And I just want you to know how much my heart goes out to you, because I believe, unlike previous generations, your generation has more pressures and more stressors than any other generation before you. And social media has been a big part of that, a big reason for that. Because when I was in middle school or high school and your leaders were in middle school, high school, and we made a mistake, yeah, it was embarrassing for a little bit, but it wasn't captured on video and uploaded to Instagram or Facebook or YouTube and then replayed time and time and time again. And so these are some of the stressors that you deal with. And on top of all those added stressors and added pressures, I believe you have fewer and fewer resources in order to navigate these tricky teenage years. And that breaks my heart. And actually, one of the things that makes me really sad, too, is that the church has not been a very safe place for people to go to talk about this. the church, like all of us, regardless of our age, whether we're adults, whether we're young people, all of us need safe people that we can go and talk to. All of us need safe people that we can open up and just share what's going on in our world and candidly and honestly share, this is where I'm at, and be received and loved unconditionally through the whole process. And I wish that the church were a safe place for that conversation to take place, but sadly it's not. And so I read an article here recently by a girl named Katie Orr. Katie Orr is a pastor's wife, and she wrote this blog post called The Lies of Depression. And as she has journeyed with her self through this state of depression a couple years ago, she found that the church actually communicates a couple of lies. Would you like to hear what some of those lies are about this topic? She said this, that one of the lies is that if I struggle with depression, then I must be doing something wrong. Not necessarily. Like, just to rebut that a little bit, look at Job from the Bible, you know? All of the trial, all the suffering, all of the heartache that he went through wasn't because he was doing anything wrong. In fact, quite the contrary. It was because he was doing everything right that he was going through his trial. A second lie that Katie now acknowledges here is that depression is sinful. And that if I had depression, I must have an idol in my life which I cling to more than God. Not necessarily. I don't believe that depression in and of itself is sinful. It just means that we're going through a difficult time. So a third lie that she identifies is, if I'm depressed, then I must not be experiencing God enough, or He must not be enough for me. I know pastors, I know godly people who are Christians, who go through a season every now and then, sometimes in their life, that's just a difficult season. And they wrestle with this. And here's the fourth thing that she observes. She says that good Christians are not depressed. Therefore, I should not be depressed either. Again, there are godly people who go through difficult times in their life. And so, part of what I want to do tonight is that I just want to communicate to you that that I want the church to be a safe place for this conversation to take place. I want you to know that that this is not something that we should not talk about here. That I want it. My hope, I guess, is that as a result of this talk tonight, that maybe you would feel more comfortable if this is something that you're struggling with, to come and talk to us as leaders, and share just your journey with us. I would love for that to happen. I would love for this subject to not be taboo here in this place. So, I don't believe that the church implicitly or explicitly states these lies. You know, that they go around, the church says these things, but I think it's something that's implicitly communicated. And thus the church is kind of perceived as an unsafe place. And I think that's tragic. Now, I want you to know, too, that tonight, this is a huge subject, and there's no way that I'm going to be able to cover everything that needs to be said about this tonight. And so as I thought through and prayed through about what to share with you, here's kind of where I felt God leading me. I felt Him saying, just ask this question, what is God's heart for people who are struggling with depression? Or just mental illness in general? What is God's heart? Like, let's not buy into those lies. Let's just ask that question, what is God's heart for people who are struggling with this? And there's two passages that I'd like to take us to tonight. One is found in Mark chapter 3, the first couple of verses right there in Mark 3. And the other one is found in Hebrews 6. Now, do you guys have a Bible with you, or like maybe something on your phone that you could just open up and turn to? Because I would love it if each of us could turn there in the scriptures and just kind of follow along. So, yeah, would you want to help me out with that? Yeah, that would be great. So, Joe, as we're passing out those Bibles, is there something I need to do different with the mic? Maybe you can pop it a little bit. Pull it back. All right. Sorry about that. So we're in Mark chapter 3, verses 1 through 6 is where we'll start. Now, my hope tonight is this. I just want to take a look at Jesus' heart for hurting people and God's secure anchor of hope. Those are the two things that I want to talk about. It's super simple. But I hope that this will be helpful to each of you. Okay, so Mark chapter 3, if you're there, I would love for you just to follow along. So another time, Jesus, that's Jesus, went into the synagogue, and a man with a shriveled hand was there. So right away in verse 3, we get to see a little bit of the setting. We see that the day it happens to be a Sabbath day. It's the synagogue. Everyone's at the synagogue. This is where the scene takes place in Mark's gospel. And that Jesus is there, and there's another man there, a man with a shriveled hand. Now, verse 2 is going to begin to introduce for us some of the tension here in this scene. Some of them were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus. So and I assume that they is the Pharisees. The Pharisees are looking. They're looking for a way and for a reason to accuse Jesus. So they watched him. They watched him closely to see if he would heal him on the Sabbath. Now there's the tension. The tension is Jesus going to violate the fourth commandment? The fourth commandment is that we should honor the Sabbath. We should rest on the Sabbath. And the Pharisees are looking to see, is he going to heal him? Or is he going to just not do anything at all? They're looking for a way to accuse him. Is he going to violate that commandment? This is part of the tension of this little section here in Mark 3. So Jesus said, now verse 3, Jesus said to the man with the shriveled hand, "Stand up in front of everyone." Then Jesus asked them, "Which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save life or to kill?" But they remained silent. Just something that I think is interesting here. Jesus intentionally draws attention to the man with the shriveled hand. He has him stand up. And I think this is the beginning of it. It reveals to us Jesus' heart to heal and restore that which is deformed. And then notice what Jesus does here. Jesus exposes, in the next verse, Jesus exposes the intentions of his accusers. And their silence angers Jesus because it exposes their lust for power and prominence, and their willingness to do evil in order to attain it. And this angers Jesus. Now, this isn't the first time that Jesus has had a little conflict with the Pharisees about the Sabbath. Because in the section just before these verses that we're looking at, Jesus has another conflict with the Pharisees about the Sabbath. And this time, the catalyst for that conversation was Jesus and his disciples are walking through the fields picking grain and eating them. And it just so happens to be on the Sabbath. And one of the things that Jesus says to them in that final exchange between himself and the Pharisees, and he says to them, is, "The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath." Basically, Jesus is saying that, look, God created way back in Genesis chapters 1 and 2, when God first created the world. What did God do on the seventh day? He rested. And in resting, he gave us a pattern, that gave us an example that we too are supposed to take a day and just rest. And that day was for man. It was for us. And what the Pharisees were doing was getting that order all mixed up. They were trying to say that the Sabbath, that man has to serve the Sabbath. And they were putting mankind, men and women, underneath the Sabbath in like a hierarchy chain. And therefore, because they're the Pharisees and they're the ones interpreting the 613 or whatever commandments of the Old Testament, that elevates them above the Sabbath. So for the Pharisees, the order went Pharisees, Sabbath, man. And this angers Jesus because this isn't the way it was meant to be from the beginning. The Pharisees have the order all wrong. Jesus is saying, "I am Lord of the Sabbath." And Sabbath was created for man. So in Jesus' order, it goes Jesus, man, Sabbath.
And this is what angers Jesus, is because the Pharisees have got this order all wrong. And look what they're willing to do in order to maintain their power, in order to maintain their prominence. They're looking, they're watching for ways to kill Jesus. So which is better, to do good or to do evil? To give life, to restore life, or to take it and kill it? So let's look at verse 5. I got ahead a little bit here. But he looked at them in anger and deeply distressed at their stubborn hearts. He said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." He stretched it out, and his hand was restored completely. Then the Pharisees went out and began to plot with the Herodians how they might kill Jesus. Verse 6 exposes the evil and the murderous intentions of the Pharisees. That they had evil in their hearts. They're looking for ways to do evil and to kill. And I want us to catch the contrast here. Look at what the Pharisees were looking and intent on doing. They were intent on killing. They were intent on doing evil. And that reflected the evil intentions of their ultimate father, who is Satan. But look at Jesus. By way of contrast, look at Jesus. When he looks out the crowd, when he looks out at the people in the synagogue, he is looking, he is watching, he is waiting for ways in which to bring good, to do good, to restore, to bring healing. And he sees a man with a shriveled hand, and he doesn't hold back. Because Jesus reveals the heart of his Father, of God the Father, who is seeking to heal, to restore, and to bring wholeness. I think that's an amazing contrast. I look at that and I derive huge hope and encouragement. Okay, so the question then, what does this passage have to do with depression? What does this passage have to do with mental illness? Well, there's three things that I want to draw our attention to. The first is this. The man with the deformed hand, where was he? He's in the synagogue. And this shows us, Mark shows us, that those with imperfect, deformed physical abilities are welcome in the church. And I would love for the church to be a place where people can come, no matter what their hurt, no matter what their pain, no matter what their deformity, that they can come and be welcomed here in the church. And the same is true for people with the imperfect, deformed mental illnesses as well. One is really simple, easy to see, it's visible. The other is not so easy to see. But I would love for all people to be welcome in the synagogue, to be welcome here in the church. So that's the first observation. The second is this, that it is okay for God's people to admit a struggle with depression or mental illness. Do you see what Jesus had the guy do in verse 3? Jesus said to the man with the shriveled hand, "Stand up in front of everyone." See, this guy, this man with the shriveled hand, he had to square with this present reality in order to receive healing. He couldn't sit in the pews, he couldn't sit in the chair for forever, but he had to square with that reality. And when Jesus sees something that isn't right, when he sees something that isn't meant to be the way it's supposed to be, his heart is to restore. His heart is to heal, to make whole and complete that which is broken. And that's huge. Please know that Jesus is not looking to condemn. He's not looking to bring shame. He's not looking to beat us up. But he's looking to bring healing. He's looking to bring restoration. And I just think that's important, that we see that heart of Jesus in us. The third thing that I want to mention is this. The fact that this man is in the synagogue teaches us that being one of God's people does not inoculate or immunize us from real hurt and pain. And sometimes that pain is physical, whether it's through abuse. And sometimes it's not as obvious to see. And I believe each of us carry with us some wounds, some hurts that we have picked up along the way. And it doesn't matter if you're a regular church attender. It doesn't matter if you've given your life to Jesus and you're following even faithfully after him. Being a Christian does not immunize us or inoculate us from the reality of pain and and sin in this world. Jesus said himself, right, on his final night with his disciples around him, he says in John 16 in the Olivet Discourse, in this world you will have trouble. He promises us that. And so it's not surprising then when Christians admit a struggle with depression. So we live in a broken, a sin-stained world, and all of us, whether we're Christians or not, we all struggle with this. We all have hurt and pain. And even though our greatest debt is paid for, even though our sins are completely covered, that doesn't mean that we pick up some of that junk along the way. And I just want to say to you that it's okay. It's okay if we're struggling with it. And maybe, I thought about this too. Like, maybe that's just part of God's merciful process of being made whole again. And we shouldn't expect that there isn't pain in that process. There can be. But even as I look at my own stuff and my own mess, and I try to process some things that's layered, it's thick, it's complicated, my hope and my trust is that if I can work well through this, when I come out on the other end, I'm going to be made more whole again. Like Humpty Dumpty, who sat on a wall and had a great fall. All the king's men, all the king's horses tried to put him back together again. I'm hoping that maybe I'll be put together again, made a little bit more whole. And that's encouraging. So this passage in Mark then, it reveals God's heart to heal and restore that which is deformed. And I would say that's encouraging. But if you're struggling with depression, you need more than encouragement. You need hope. And that's why I want us to look briefly at the second passage in Hebrews chapter 6, verse 19. And as you're turning there, Joe, I think in the back, there may be an anchor or something back there. Is there an anchor that you could just bring up here? And I got a little visual illustration I want to share with you. So Hebrews chapter 6, verse 19 is where we'll go next. I've heard this said before about hope, and that is that you can live something like 30 days without food. You can live 3 days without water, but you can't live 3 seconds without hope. And this is what I want to share with you. So, some of you know that my wife and I, our family, we've had some amazing opportunities in life to live overseas. And one of those really cool opportunities that we had was to live in Naples, Italy. And on this screen up here, you see a little bit of the coast of Naples. I'll just draw your attention to a few things. So this is Naples. This is where we lived for about 3 years, from 2006 to 2009. And one of the really fun things that we got to do while we were stationed there is we got to take kids, your age, on this boating trip. We would put them in these inflatable rafts, and we would go sail from Pozzuoli here, and we would leave that little bay area, and we would kind of journey. This little island right here is an island called Procida, and we would sail past there, and we would come into this island right here called Ischia. And what we would do is we would look for cliff jumping places that we could jump off cliffs into the beautiful, clear water of the Mediterranean, okay? And I want to just, Joe, if you could zoom in, there is a little island right here off the coast of Ischia that was our favorite place to go cliff jumping, okay? And there it is. You can see it. I want us to zoom in because I think Google does an amazing job of picking this up and how cool it is that there's like a little ramp. I mean, this was the perfect spot, guys. There's a little ramp that you could just come right up onto, and then you could jump off this end right here, and then there's a place on the backside. It's beautiful. It's just beautiful. It's so much fun. Well, while we're out there, we were out there for a while, and so we took an anchor that looked very much like this one, okay? And we throw this anchor overboard. Now, the water that we were in was about 30 feet deep. All right? And this anchor just sank all the way to the bottom. Well, I didn't know it, but when I threw that anchor overboard, it actually got stuck. It went down in between two rocks. All right, and that anchor was secure. Let me promise you something. There was no way that anchor was coming back up. Now, of course, I didn't figure that out till about an hour and a half later when we're ready to leave. And I tried to pull anchor, and it's just not coming up. I mean, I tried to do everything I could to loosen that anchor from the rocks beneath us. I even took my mask and snorkel, and I tried skin diving. And we were in about 30 feet of water, and I tried going all the way to the bottom. And by the time I finally got to the bottom, which I can get to that depth, but I had no more air left in my lungs. And so I could see that the anchor was stuck. It was one of those anchors that kind of folds up like a little accordion, and then once it settles in, it opens up. And then there was just no way I was coming up with that anchor. And so with that in mind, with that image in mind, let me read for you this passage here in Hebrews chapter 6. So Hebrews 6, verse 19. The author says this: "We have this hope as an anchor for the soul, firm and secure. It enters the inner sanctuary behind the curtain where Jesus, who went before us, has entered on our behalf, and he has become a high priest forever in the order of Melchizedek." Now, some of the context of what's happening here in Hebrews chapter 6 is this: the author is saying that God's promises are sure. That when God makes a promise, you can be absolutely confident that he is going to follow through on it. That God doesn't break his promises. And what he's saying is this: I want you to imagine that this anchor right here is not between two rocks at the bottom of 30 feet of water, but there is an anchor. When we are in Christ, there is an anchor like this, not between two rocks, but in the inner sanctuary, up in heaven. Friends, let me tell you something. There is no more secure place in this entire universe for which you can secure an anchor. This is the most sacred place. This is the most trustworthy place. This is a place that nobody else can enter. And that's where that anchor is secured. And in Christ, we're basically tied to Jesus. That we have this amazing hope. We are tied to that, okay? Imagine that. You're tied to that. And that anchor is up in heaven. And we're tied to that. And nobody is going to loosen that anchor. Now that provides for me huge hope. That says to me that no matter what I'm going through in this world, no matter what kind of trial, no matter what kind of depression or state of depression I might be in, or that you might be in, or maybe a friend that you have might be in, that if we are anchored to that, we will not ever fall away. We are secure. And that gives me hope. It gives me confidence that no matter what I'm going through, I might get beaten, I might get battered, I might have all kinds of trials, all kinds of suffering, but man, if I am connected to Jesus, and that anchor is secured in heaven, then nothing can separate me from the love of God.
Amen.
And that is a huge, huge promise. And I hope that comes to you as a huge ray of hope and encouragement for a message like this on a difficult subject. Guys, depression is complicated. It's messy. There's all kinds of causes. I'm not going to pretend for one moment to know what the individual cause is. Causation is a difficult thing to prove anyway. The reality is it's probably a whole bunch of things that are all coming together, that are all coalescing and working all at the same time, that are causing us to just be in a dark, difficult place. But what I want you to know is this: that we have a Father in heaven who is seeking, who is looking to heal and restore and bring to wholeness that which is broken. And we have an anchor of hope that is sure and that is awesome. So here's what I want to challenge you to do. Maybe this Taylor, you guys in the band can come back up. And I want to challenge you to do this. That I don't pretend to know for one moment the drama and the stuff that's going on in your world. But I do want to ask you to bring your brokenness to the Father. Just bring your stuff. Bring yourself, bring your drama, bring your brokenness to the Father. Maybe like me, you struggle with negative thoughts every now and then. Guys, just being transparent with you, every now and then, and my wife can testify to this, every now and then I just wake up in the middle of the night and I wouldn't even want to repeat for you the kinds of things that are going through my head. It is awful. It is awful. I wake up and think, what am I doing? What do I have to offer? And these voices sometimes can be so oppressive that it almost feels demonic. So maybe that's you. Maybe you've got similar voices that go through your head. Just bring that brokenness to the Father and say, God, this is where I'm at. This is what I'm dealing with. Because Jesus is looking to heal and restore. Maybe you beat yourself up verbally. Maybe you compare yourself with other people like I do. And I'm constantly saying, I just don't measure up. There's other people who do it far better. And I'll beat myself up even for that. I'll talk myself out of the good job that I'm doing. Or maybe you compare yourself to other people and you elevate yourself. And you say, look how good I am. I'm so much better than that person. I know I sin, but at least I don't murder people. At least I'm not sleeping around like he is or like she is. Whatever your brokenness, whatever it is that you're struggling with, I just want to challenge you during this last song that we're singing together to bring your brokenness to the Father. And I loved what Rich did last time with that. He just provided an opportunity where if you wanted to come forward and pray with one of us, that this is an opportunity for you to be able to do that tonight. And us as leaders will be delighted to be able to share that time with you and to pray with you. I don't believe that every cause, that's the spiritual realm is the cause for all of our mess and all of our stuff, necessarily. But I do believe that in Christ is all of our solutions and all of our answers. And we can go to Him to receive hope, to receive healing and restoration. So what is God's heart for people who struggle with depression or mental illness? I think from Mark, we learn that Jesus longs to heal, restore, and redeem our hurt and brokenness. And from Hebrews, we learn that in Christ, our hope for healing and restoration is secure. It's a secure anchor for the soul. And though the waves and trials and sufferings in life may beat against us, we can cling to the hope that our anchor is secure in heaven. And we can claim that promise that God finishes everything He starts. Let me finish with this promise. God says to us through Philippians that being confident of this, that He who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion. Whatever God starts, He finishes. And we can cling to that promise. So, Taylor, if you could just lead us and enter into this time a little bit worship.